In the heart of 19th-century Cairo, where the Nile's waters shimmered under the moonlight and the call to prayer echoed through narrow, dusty streets, there were places where time seemed to pause. These were the Hashish houses, tucked away in the labyrinthine alleys of the old city, where men from all walks of life gathered to escape the weight of the day. The air was thick with the sweet, earthy scent of hashish, and the low murmur of voices blended with the occasional pluck of a oud, creating a cocoon of calm. Picture a modest building, its wooden door weathered by years of sun and sand. Inside, the hashish house was dimly lit, with lanterns casting a warm, amber glow across cushions scattered on the floor. The walls, cracked and stained from years of use, were adorned with little more than the stories of those who sat within them. Merchants, poets, laborers, and even the occasional scholar would find their way here, each seeking a moment of reprieve from the bustle of Cairo's markets or the demands of their trade. The hashish itself was prepared with care, a ritual as old as the city's stones. It came in small, resinous balls, dark and fragrant, sourced from the cannabis plants grown in the fertile lands of Upper Egypt or traded across the Red Sea. The keeper of the house, often a quiet man with knowing eyes, would crumble the hashish into a pipe or mix it into a sweet paste, sometimes blended with honey or spices to soften its bite. Patrons would take their place on the cushions, reclining as they passed the pipe or sipped from tiny cups of strong, sugary tea to balance the heady effects. Life in these houses wasn't about wild revelry. It was about connection and contemplation. Men would sit in loose circles, their voices low and unhurried, sharing tales of their day or legends of old Cairo. One might speak of a caravan lost in the desert, another of a jinn said to haunt the ruins beyond the city gates. The hashish loosened their tongues and softened their worries, letting laughter come easily and silences feel comfortable. For many, it was a place to dream awake, where the mind could wander through memories or imagine distant lands without ever leaving the room. The hashish houses weren't grand like the coffee houses of the wealthy, with their polished brass trays and imported beans. They were humble, sometimes cramped, and carried the faint mustiness of age. Yet there was a kind of democracy in them. A porter might sit shoulder to shoulder with a scribe, their differences blurred by the shared haze. Women, though rarely seen in these spaces, were not entirely absent. Some houses, hidden deeper in the city, catered to them, offering a rare space for women to gather and share their own stories. The rhythm of the hashish house followed the city's pulse. As dusk settled and the heat of the day gave way to a cooler breeze, the houses filled. By midnight, they were alive with soft laughter and the clink of cups, the air heavy with smoke and the scent of cardamom from the tea. As the hours stretched on, the energy would wane, voices growing quieter, bodies sinking deeper into the cushions. Some would drift into sleep right there, lulled by the warmth and the weightlessness of the moment. Not everyone approved of these places. The more pious scholars of Al-Azhar, Cairo's great mosque and university, frowned upon the hashish houses, calling them dens of idleness. The Ottoman governors who ruled Egypt at the time sometimes cracked down, closing houses or fining their keepers. But the houses persisted, as much a part of Cairo's soul as the minarets piercing the skyline. For those who entered, they offered a fleeting escape, a chance to set aside the grind of survival and float in a world of their own making. As the night wore on, the hashish house would grow still. The lanterns dimmed, their oil nearly spent, and the last patrons would stumble out into the cool air, the city now quiet save for the distant bark of a dog or the creak of a cart. The keeper would sweep the floors, readying the space for another evening, another gathering of souls seeking solace in the smoke. And so, as you imagine those quiet rooms, the flicker of lantern light, and the soft hum of voices fading into the night, let your own thoughts drift. Picture the Nile flowing gently beyond the city, carrying the stories of Cairo into the dark. Let the weight of the day slip away, like smoke rising and dissolving into the air, and ease into sleep. As the dawn's first light began to creep over the rooftops of Cairo, painting the minarets in soft pinks and golds, the Hashish houses would empty out entirely. The keeper, perhaps a man named Ahmed with a beard streaked in gray and hands calloused from years of grinding resins, would latch the door and retire to his small room at the back. There, amidst shelves lined with jars of dried herbs and forgotten pipes, he'd count the few coins earned from the night, modest sums, enough for bread, tea, and the next supply of hashish from the caravans that wound down from the south. But let us linger a while longer in the evenings, when the houses came alive once more. Take, for instance, a typical gathering in one such place near the Bab Zawela Gate, where the ancient walls of the city whispered secrets to those who passed. The patrons arrived in twos and threes, shedding the dust of the day from their galabeas, long, loose robes that billowed like sails in the evening breeze. A spice merchant named Karim, his fingers still scented with cinnamon and cloves from the Khan Al-Khalili Bazaar, would claim his usual spot by the window, where he could watch the shadows lengthen across the alley. Karim was a regular, drawn not just by the hashish, but by the companionship it fostered. He'd light his pipe slowly, inhaling the warm, herbal vapor that spread through his chest like a sigh of relief. Around him, others settled in, a young poet named Yusuf, scribbling verses on scraps of paper by lantern light, an elderly storyteller known only as Baba Hassan, whose tales of pharaohs and hidden treasures could stretch for hours, and a group of laborers from the cotton fields, their muscles weary from hauling bales under the relentless sun. The conversations meandered like the Nile itself, twisting through topics both mundane and profound. Baba Hassan might begin with a story of the great Sultan Saladin, who once defended Cairo from crusaders, his voice rising and falling in a rhythmic cadence that matched the pulse of the hashish. "Ah, my friends," he'd say, pausing to pass the pipe. In those days, the city was a fortress of stone and spirit, much like our little haven here. The others would nod, their eyes half closed, as the smoke wove patterns in the air, blurring the line between history and dream. Sometimes, the hashish inspired visions, gentle hallucinations that colored the ordinary with wonder. Yusuf the poet might see the walls shimmer like the surface of a still pond, or hear the distant muezzin's call as a melody from paradise. He'd murmur lines of poetry. In the embrace of the green leaf's whisper, the soul finds rivers unseen. The group would listen, sipping their tea, which was brewed strong and sweet with mint leaves to counter the dryness in their throats. No one rushed. Time in the hashish house was elastic, stretching to accommodate every anecdote and reflection. Not all nights were serene. Occasionally, a newcomer would arrive, wide-eyed and curious, perhaps a traveler from Alexandria or a Bedouin from the Sinai sands. They'd be welcomed with a nod and a shared pipe, but if the effects proved too strong, the keeper would guide them to a quieter corner, offering water and words of calm. "Breathe easy, brother," Ahmed might say. "The plant is a teacher, not a tyrant." Such moments reminded everyone of the delicate balance. The hashish could uplift or overwhelm, depending on the dose and the disposition. Deeper into the night, as the city outside grew quieter, the hashish house might host impromptu music. Someone would produce a rabab, a simple stringed instrument, its notes plaintive and echoing off the walls. The tunes were old ones, passed down through generations, laments of lost love, odes to the desert's vastness, or joyful rhythms from village festivals. Under the influence, the music seemed to vibrate in the air, wrapping around the listeners like a warm blanket. Bodies swayed gently, not in dance, but in subtle harmony with the melody. Women's hashish houses, though fewer and more discreet, followed a similar pattern but with their own nuances. Hidden in the women's quarters of larger homes or in secluded alleys near the hammams, these spaces allowed wives, mothers, and widows to gather away from prying eyes. Here, the air might carry the added scent of rosewater or jasmine incense, and the conversations turned to matters of the heart and home, arranged marriages, recipes for koshari passed from mother to daughter, or whispers about the latest scandals in the harem of the Khedive's palace. The hashish softened their burdens, letting laughter bubble up like a spring in the oasis. Yet, the world outside pressed in at times. In the 1840s, under Muhammad Ali's reforms, Egypt modernized rapidly, canals were dug, factories built, and European influences seeped into Cairo's streets. Some patrons grumbled about the changes. The Franks bring their machines and their haste, one might say, exhaling a cloud of smoke. But here, we keep the old ways. Others dreamed of progress, imagining steamships on the Nile or railways connecting Cairo to the sea. The hashish fueled these debates, turning them into philosophical musings rather than heated arguments. As the Ottoman Empire's grip on Egypt loosened in the later decades, with British shadows looming by the 1880s, the hashish houses became subtle refuges for quiet resistance. Whispers of nationalism might circulate, tales of Ahmed Urabi's rebellion against foreign control shared in hushed tones. But mostly, they remained apolitical sanctuaries, places where the empire's troubles felt distant, muffled by the haze. The seasons influenced the houses too. In the sweltering summers, when the Khamsin winds blew hot sand through the streets, the houses offered cool respite, thick walls keeping the interior shaded, fans of palm fronds stirring the air. Winter brought a chill, and patrons huddled closer, wrapping in woolen shawls as they shared warmer brews, laced with ginger. Floods from the Nile might force temporary closures, the muddy waters lapping at doorsteps, but the houses always reopened, resilient as the river itself. And so, night after night, year after year, the cycle continued. The hashish houses were threads in Cairo's vast tapestry, woven from the lives of countless souls seeking solace. They weren't glamorous or eternal, but in their simplicity, they captured the essence of the city, enduring, enigmatic, and ever-flowing like the Nile's waters. The hashish house near Bab Zawela, known to locals as Dar al-Saban for the soap merchant who once owned the building, was a modest refuge, but its reputation stretched far beyond its crumbling walls. By the mid-19th century, under the flickering reign of the Ottoman Khedives, it had become a haven not just for Cairo's working men but for wanderers from distant lands, traders from Damascus, sailors from Jeddah, even the occasional European adventurer chasing rumors of the Orient's mystique. Each brought their own stories, adding new threads to the tapestry of the house's nights. On one such evening, as the muezzin's call for Maghrib prayer faded and the air cooled, the door creaked open to admit a newcomer, a lanky man named Ibrahim, a camel driver from the Fayum oasis. His face was weathered by the desert sun, his eyes bright with the curiosity of someone who'd spent weeks crossing sands with only his animals for company. He carried a small bundle of hashish, a gift from a Bedouin friend, and offered it to Ahmed, the keeper, with a shy nod. "From the south," he said softly, "grown where the stars touch the earth." Ahmed, ever the guardian of his house's rhythm, inspected the resin with a practiced eye, crumbling a pinch between his fingers. "Good quality," he murmured, his voice a low hum that blended with the crackle of the lantern's wick. He prepared a pipe for Ibrahim, who took a seat near Karim, the spice merchant, and Baba Hassan, the storyteller, who was already midway through a tale about a jinn who guarded a forgotten well in the Sinai. The newcomer listened, his shoulders easing as the hashish worked its gentle magic, softening the edges of his long journey. The hashish houses, though simple, were microcosms of Cairo's diversity. On any given night, you might hear Arabic spoken in the sharp clip of the Delta, the rolling cadence of Upper Egypt, or the guttural tones of a Sudanese trader. There were moments when languages mingled, Turkish from Ottoman officials, Greek from merchants of the Mediterranean, even broken French from a visiting artist sketching the city's minarets. The hashish smoothed over differences, its smoke a universal language that invited all to linger in its embrace. Tonight, the conversation turned to the Nile, the lifeblood of the city. Karim, his voice slow and warm from the pipe, spoke of the river's annual flood, which had just receded, leaving the fields fertile and the air heavy with the scent of silt. "My grandfather used to say the Nile is a mother," he said, exhaling a plume of smoke that curled toward the ceiling. "She gives, she takes, but she always returns." Ibrahim nodded, his thoughts drifting to the oasis springs of his home, where water was as precious as gold. "In Fayum," he added, "we pray to the river even when we cannot see it." Baba Hassan, never one to let a moment pass without a story, leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "There's a tale," he began, "of a fisherman who loved the Nile so deeply he refused to leave her banks, even when the floods came. One night, under a moon as round as a dinar, she rose to meet him, not as water but as a woman cloaked in silver." The group fell silent, caught in the spell of his words. The hashish made the story vivid, as if the silver-cloaked woman might step through the door at any moment, her footsteps leaving wet prints on the stone floor. Beyond the walls of Dar al-Sabaun, Cairo pulsed with its own nocturnal life. The clatter of donkey carts faded as the markets closed, replaced by the soft patter of feet and the occasional cry of a street vendor selling tamarind juice. The hashish house, though, was a world apart. Its windows, small and shuttered, let in only slivers of moonlight, and the air inside grew thick with the mingled scents of hashish, tea, and the faint musk of bodies pressed close in the small space. The cushions, patched and worn, cradled patrons like old friends, their patterns faded from years of use. In the women's hashish houses, the evenings unfolded with their own intimacy. One such place, hidden behind a courtyard draped in jasmine vines, was run by Layla, a widow with a sharp wit and a gentle hand. Her house was smaller, its walls hung with woven rugs to muffle sound. Here, women gathered to share not just hashish, but the weight of their lives. A young bride anxious about her new husband's temper, a mother fretting over a sick child, a seamstress dreaming of a shop of her own. Layla would listen, her fingers deftly preparing the hashish paste, sometimes mixing it with crushed dates for a sweeter taste. "The heart speaks what the tongue cannot," she'd say, passing a small bowl to her guests. These women's gatherings were rare treasures in a city where public spaces were dominated by men. The hashish loosened their laughter, letting it ring like bells in the night. Sometimes, a woman might sing, a lullaby from her village or a love song heard in the market, her voice weaving through the smoke like a thread through fabric. Other nights, they'd share practical wisdom, a remedy for fever, a way to stretch flour through lean times, or a charm to ward off envy. The hashish house was their sanctuary, a place where they could be unguarded, if only for a few hours. Back at Dar al-Sabaun, the night stretched on, the air growing heavier as the hashish worked its spell. Yusuf, the poet, had filled a scrap of paper with lines inspired by Baba Hassan's tale. Her eyes were rivers, her voice the flood, / her love the silt that feeds the blood. He read them aloud, his voice soft but clear, and the group murmured their approval. Ibrahim, now fully at ease, shared a story of his own, a night in the desert when the stars seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, as if the sky itself were alive. The hashish made such memories feel close, tangible, as if the desert's vastness could fit within the room's cracked walls. The house wasn't without its challenges. The supply of hashish could be unreliable, especially when trade routes were disrupted by floods or banditry. Ahmed, the keeper, had a knack for stretching his stores, sometimes mixing in local herbs to preserve the precious resin. There were nights when tempers flared, a patron drinking too much tea and growing jittery, or an argument over a debt, but Ahmed's calm presence usually restored peace. "This is a house of rest," he'd say, his voice firm but kind, and the offenders would settle back, chastened by the reminder of the space's purpose. As the century wore on, the Hashish houses faced growing scrutiny. The British, now tightening their grip on Egypt, saw them as dens of vice, a threat to their vision of order. Religious reformers, too, preached against them, quoting hadiths that warned of intoxication sins. Yet, for every house that was shuttered, another seemed to open, tucked deeper into the maze of Cairo's alleys. The people needed these spaces, needed the escape they offered from the grind of taxes, conscription, and the slow creep of foreign rule. By the early hours, Dar al-Saban grew quiet. The Rabba player had long since packed his instrument, and Baba Hassan's stories had given way to gentle snores. Ibrahim, the camel driver, leaned against a cushion, his eyes tracing invisible patterns in the air. Karim, the spice merchant, gathered his things, ready to return to his shop at dawn. Yusuf folded his poems into his pocket, promising to return with more. Ahmed swept the floor, the broom's soft rustle blending with the distant coo of pigeons nesting in the minarets. Outside, Cairo slept, its dreams carried on the Nile's current. The Hashish house of Dar al-Saban, nestled near the ancient Bab Zawela gate, was more than a place, it was a living archive of Cairo's heart. By the 1860s, as the city swelled with ambition under Khedive Ismail's dreams of a modern Egypt, the Hashish houses remained steadfast, their doors open to those who sought refuge from the clamor of progress. The world outside was changing, gas lamps flickered on new boulevards, and steamships churned the Nile's waters. But within these walls, time moved to the slower beat of the hashish pipe and the stories it unlocked. On this particular evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky blushed to deep indigo, the house filled with its usual mix of souls. Ahmed, the keeper, moved with quiet efficiency, stoking the small brazier that warmed the tea and arranging cushions for the night's patrons. His face, lined with the wisdom of countless evenings, betrayed a flicker of amusement as he greeted familiar faces. Karim, the spice merchant, whose galabia carried the faint scent of saffron, Yusuf, the poet, clutching a fresh sheaf of papers, and Baba Hassan, the storyteller, whose voice could coax even the most restless mind into calm. But tonight, there was another figure in the room, one who drew curious glances. She was called Zainab, a rare woman in this men's gathering, though her presence was not entirely unheard of. Zainab was a healer, known in the poorer quarters of Cairo for her salves and tonics, brewed from herbs gathered along the river's edge. Her hands, stained with henna and the green of crushed leaves, moved with purpose as she accepted a pipe from Ahmed. "For the pain in my bones," she said with a wry smile, though her eyes hinted at a deeper need for the hashish's soothing haze. The men, respectful of her reputation, made space, their curiosity tempered by the unspoken rules of the house. The air grew thick with the sweet, musky scent of hashish, mingling with the sharp tang of mint tea and the faint char of the brazier's coals. Ibrahim, the camel driver from Fayum, had returned, his bundle of desert-grown hashish now a shared treasure among the group. He spoke little, content to listen as Baba Hassan spun a new tale, this one about a merchant who traded his wealth for a single night with a star fallen to earth. "He found her in the desert," Baba Hassan said, his voice low and melodic, her light dimmed but her beauty brighter than any jewel. The hashish made the story shimmer, each word painting the air with visions of starlight and sand. Zainab, reclining on a cushion near the wall, added her own quiet commentary. "Stars fall, but they leave no trace," she murmured, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too many hopes flicker out. Her words stirred a gentle debate, the kind that only the hashish could nurture, philosophical, unhurried, and free of judgment. Karim wondered aloud if the stars were like the Nile, eternal yet ever-changing. Yusuf, inspired, scratched a new line on his paper. "The river holds the sky's secrets, but only in its depths." The hashish houses were not just for storytelling, they were places where lives intersected, where the boundaries of class, trade, and even gender blurred in the smoke. A young water carrier named Mahmoud, barely 16, slipped in late, his shoulders slumped from hauling jars through the city's heat. He was new to the house, drawn by whispers of its calm, and Ahmed welcomed him with a small cup of tea, free of charge. First nights are for listening, Ahmed said, passing him a pipe. Mahmoud's eyes widened at the first inhale, the world softening as the hashish dulled the ache in his muscles and the weight of his daily grind. Across the city, in the women's hashish house run by Layla, a parallel scene unfolded. The jasmine-draped courtyard was alive with soft laughter as a group of women gathered, their voices a gentle counterpoint to the men's deeper tones at Dar al-Saban. Among them was Fatima, a weaver whose fingers danced over looms by day but now rested, curled around a small bowl of hashish paste. She spoke of her latest creation, a rug patterned with the blues and greens of the Nile, and the women listened, their eyes bright with shared pride. Layla, ever the host, poured tea laced with rose water, her movements as steady as the river itself. In these women's spaces, the hashish served as both medicine and muse. One woman, a midwife named Aisha, shared a remedy for sleepless infants, her words slow and deliberate under the hashish's influence. Another, a young girl named Salma, confessed her fears about an impending marriage, her voice trembling until Layla placed a hand on her shoulder. "The heart finds its way," she said, and the group nodded, the smoke weaving a sense of solidarity among them. Sometimes they'd sing old songs of love or rebellion, their voices rising and falling like the tides of the Nile, carrying their hopes into the night. Back at Dar al-Saban, the night deepened and the conversations grew more intimate. Ibrahim spoke of his life in Fam, where the desert met the green, and how the hashish reminded him of home's quiet nights under endless stars. Zainab, emboldened by the pipe, shared a memory of her childhood when her mother taught her to read the patterns of leaves in a cup of tea, predicting fortunes that were more hope than truth. "She saw a long life for me," Zainab said, her smile tinged with wistfulness. "But she never said it would be easy." The hashish houses were not immune to the world's troubles. Outside, Cairo was a city in flux. The Khedive's grand projects, palaces, theaters, and wide avenues, came at a cost, with taxes squeezing the poor and conscription pulling young men from their families. In the hashish houses, these burdens found voice. Mahmoud, the water carrier, spoke haltingly of his brother, taken to serve in the army, his fate unknown. The group listened, their silence a kind of prayer, and Ahmed refilled Mahmoud's tea, a small gesture of comfort in a world that offered little. Yet, the houses were also places of resilience. When the Nile's floods were late, threatening famine, patrons shared what little they had, bread, dates, or a handful of lentils, turning the hashish house into a communal table. When British soldiers patrolled the streets, their boots heavy on the cobblestones, the houses became quiet refuges for whispered dreams of freedom. One day, Karim said, his eyes distant, "Egypt will be ours again." The hashish made such hopes feel possible, if only for the night. As the hours stretched toward dawn, the energy in Dar al-Saban softened. The rabba player, a quiet man who rarely spoke, plucked a final melody, its notes fading like ripples on water. Baba Hassan's stories gave way to murmurs, then silence, as some patrons drifted into sleep, their heads resting on cushions or against the cool walls. Zainab, her pain eased by the hashish, hummed softly, a tune from her village that spoke of fields and rivers. Yusuf folded his poems, his mind already spinning new verses for tomorrow. Ahmed, ever watchful, began to tidy the room, sweeping the floor with a broom worn thin from years of use. The lanterns burned low, their light casting long shadows that danced like spirits across the walls. Outside, Cairo stirred faintly, a rooster's crow, the creak of a water wheel, the first call to far prayer. The hashish house, for now, was still, its patrons carried away by dreams or the gentle weight of the smoke. Across the city, Layla's house followed suit, the women dispersing into the pre-dawn quiet, their hearts. Dar al-Saban, with its door creaking like an old friend's sigh, stood resilient amid the ebb and flow of Cairo's history. By the 1870s, as the Khedive's ambitions swelled the city with European flair, cafes serving French coffee, carriages clattering on widened streets, the hashish houses remained untouched havens, where the ancient soul of Egypt lingered in the smoke. The Nile, ever the silent witness, mirrored the city's lights at night, its waters carrying echoes of pharaohs and merchants alike. Inside these houses, patrons found a counterpoint to the outside hustle, a space where the hashish's haze blurred the lines between past and present, dream and reality. On this evening, as the heat of the day yielded to a breeze scented with river mud and blooming acacias, Ahmed prepared the house with his usual care. He arranged fresh mint leaves for the tea, their crisp aroma cutting through the earthy promise of hashish. The patrons trickled in, each carrying the day's residue. Karim, the spice merchant, his pouch heavy with coriander seeds bartered from a Sudanese trader. Yusuf, the poet, his mind abuzz with rhymes inspired by a marketplace encounter. Baba Hassan, the storyteller, whose tales seemed to grow longer with each passing year. Zainab, the healer, her satchel now including a bundle of dried lotus petals, said to enhance visions. And Rami, the Nubian boatman, returned with his companions there. Laughter like the rumble of distant rapids. A newcomer joined the circle tonight. Omar, a scholar from Al-Azhar, his robes crisp and his beard neatly trimmed. He was young, his eyes sharp with the fire of learning, but weariness etched his brow from endless debates on theology and reform. "I seek not escape," he said quietly as Ahmed handed him a pipe, "but clarity." The hashish, prepared from Rami's Aswan blend, was lit, and its smoke rose in lazy coils, wrapping the room in a veil of calm. The group welcomed Omar with nods, the unspoken understanding that all paths led here for different reasons. The conversation began with the Nile, as it often did, but tonight it meandered into deeper waters. Rami spoke of the river's moods, the floods that nourished the land like a generous mother, the droughts that tested faith like a stern teacher. "In Aswan, we mark the river's rise with festivals," he said, his voice slow and resonant under the hashish's influence. "Drums beat, fires burn, and the water spirits dance." Baba Hassan, eyes half closed, wove in a legend. Long ago, a pharaoh angered the Nile god, happy, and the river turned to blood. Only a sacrifice of pure heart restored its flow. The story unfolded slowly, each detail blooming like a lotus in dawn light, the hashish making the ancient tale feel as fresh as the evening breeze. Zainab, passing the pipe to Omar, shared her own river wisdom. "The Nile heals as it flows," she murmured. "Its silt mends wounds, its waters cleanse the soul. I've seen fevers break with a poultice from its banks." Omar, inhaling deeply for the first time, felt the hashish soften his rigid thoughts, allowing him to ponder aloud. Is the hashish a river too, carrying us to truths we cannot reach on foot? The question hung in the air, inviting reflections. Karim chuckled softly. "Perhaps. It flows through us, washing away the dust of doubt." Yusuf, ever the wordsmith, captured the moment in verse. "The green river of smoke, winding through the mind's delta, where ideas bloom like reeds in the flood." Mahmoud, the young water carrier, listened intently, his earlier dreams of a boat now expanded by Rami's stories. He imagined himself steering through the cataracts, the Nile's spray on his face, free from the weight of his jars. The hashish made such visions vivid, almost tangible, and he whispered his hopes to the group, receiving encouraging nods that warmed him more than the brazier's coals. Meanwhile, in Umleila's women's hashish house, the courtyard bloomed with its own quiet vitality. The jasmine vines climbed higher, their white flowers releasing a heady perfume that mingled with the smoke. Fatima, the weaver, had brought a sample of her latest rug, its patterns swirling like the Nile's eddies. Salma, the bride-to-be, sat straighter now, her anxieties dulled by previous night's gatherings. Noura, the dancer, was there again, her bangles glinting as she demonstrated a step from a river festival dance. A new woman joined them, Layla's niece, Hannah, a schoolteacher in the making, her mind full of books and budding reforms. Layla prepared the hashish paste with extra care, mixing in honey from the Delta hives for a smoother taste. The women settled on cushions, the lamps casting soft shadows that danced like fireflies. Noura began with a tale of a Nile goddess who taught women to weave spells with their hips and hands, her voice rhythmic as a drum. She moved like the current, Noura said, swaying slightly, and men fell under her spell, but her true power was for her sisters. The Hashish amplified the story, making the goddess seem present, her laughter echoing in the courtyard's whispers. Fatima spoke next, her fingers tracing the rug's threads. Weaving is like the river. Thread by thread, it builds something strong. Hannah, young and eager, added thoughts from her studies. The Nile connects us all, from Alexandria to the heart of Africa. Imagine if women could travel its length, learning as we go. The conversation flowed, touching on dreams of education, whispers of rights stirred by European ideas seeping into Cairo, and simple joys like a child's first steps or a perfect batch of full medams. Aisha, the midwife, shared a birth story from the week, her words a balm for Salma's nerves. The hashish softened edges, turning fears into shared burdens, laughter into healing. In both houses, the nights were punctuated by small rituals, the passing of the pipe, the refilling of tea glasses, the occasional strum of a rabab or hum of a song. At Dar al-Sabaun, Omar found his clarity in unexpected ways, debating gently with Baba Hassan on whether hashish clouded or revealed divine truths. The scholar's initial reserve melted, and he laughed at Yusuf's playful verse comparing Al-Azhaz's domes to hashish clouds. Rami's boatmen added songs from the south, their voices harmonizing in a low, haunting melody that evoked the Nile's endless journey. The seasons influenced these gatherings profoundly. As winter approached, with cooler winds sweeping from the Mediterranean, the houses grew cozier, blankets draped over cushions, the brazier stoked higher. Patrons huddled closer, their breaths visible in the chill, the hashish's warmth spreading from within. Stories turned to tales of survival, floods that reshaped villages, caravans lost in sandstorms, loves enduring like the pyramids. In summer's heat, fans of woven palm fronds stirred the air, and lighter blends of hashish were favored, mixed with cooling herbs. Yet, change loomed. The Khedive's debts mounted, drawing British and French eyes closer, their influence creeping like vines over Cairo's walls. In the hashish houses, patrons whispered of rising taxes, foreign soldiers in the streets, and a growing call for Egyptian voices. Omar, the scholar, spoke of reformers like Muhammad Abdu, whose ideas sparked quiet debates. The hashish fueled these discussions, turning them into philosophical drifts rather than fiery arguments, allowing hope to flicker without igniting conflict. As the night waned at Dar al-Sabaun, the room grew hushed. The lanterns. By the late 1870s, Cairo stood at a crossroads, its ancient stones bearing witness to a city caught between tradition and transformation. The Khedive's grand vision had draped the city in new boulevards and theaters, but the weight of foreign debt and British influence pressed heavily on its people. Amid this change, the hashish houses, Dar al-Sabaun near Bab Zawela, Layla's courtyard, and countless others tucked in Cairo's labyrinth, remained steadfast, their doors open to those seeking solace in the haze. These were places where the Nile's eternal rhythm seemed to linger, where the past and present mingled in the sweet, earthy smoke. At Dar al-Sabaun, the evening began as it always did, with Ahmed, the keeper, preparing the space with a quiet reverence. He swept the stone floor, its cracks worn smooth by years of footsteps, and arranged cushions in a loose circle, their faded patterns telling stories of their own. The brazier glowed softly, warming pots of tea infused with mint and anise, their steam rising to meet the scent of hashish resin waiting in clay jars. The lanterns, hung from blackened beams, cast a golden light that softened the room's edges, inviting patrons to shed the day's burdens. The familiar faces arrived as dusk settled over Cairo, painting the sky in hues of saffron and indigo. Karim, the spice merchant, carried a new bundle of cloves, their sharp aroma clinging to his galabeah like a second skin. Yusuf, the poet, clutched a tattered notebook, its pages brimming with verses born from sleepless nights. Baba Hassan, the storyteller, settled into his usual corner, his eyes twinkling with a tale already forming. Zainab, the healer, brought a fresh supply of herbs, dried chamomile and river mint, said to ease both body and spirit. Rami, the Nubian boatman, returned with his companions, their laughter echoing as they shared a pipe of their floral Aswan hashish. Omar, the young Al-Azhar scholar, was there too, his presence now a regular comfort, his once rigid demeanor softened by the house's embrace. Tonight, a new figure slipped through the door, Safia, a widow from the old quarter, her shawl drawn tightly around her shoulders. She was no stranger to hardship. Her husband, a coppersmith, had died in a factory accident, leaving her to fend for her young son. Zainab, recognizing the weariness in her eyes, beckoned her to sit nearby, offering a small pipe with a gentle nod. For the heart's weight, Zainab whispered, and Safia accepted, her hands trembling slightly as she inhaled the smoke's warm promise. The hashish worked its quiet magic, loosening tongues and weaving the group into a single, unhurried rhythm. Baba Hassan began with a story of a fisherman who sailed the Nile's source, seeking a lake so vast it held the sky's reflection. He found it, Baba Hassan said, his voice a low hum, but the lake asked a price, a secret for every star he saw. The hashish made the tale vivid, each word conjuring ripples of water and glints of light. Rami, leaning back on a cushion, added his own river lore. In Nubia, we say the Nile's source is a tear from Isis, shed for her lost love. The group murmured, their minds drifting to the river's mysteries, the hashish blending myth with memory. Omar, his scholar's mind softened by the smoke, posed a question. If the Nile is divine, what does it make of us, who drink its waters and dream its dreams? The query sparked a gentle debate, with Karim suggesting the river was a mirror, reflecting both joy and sorrow. Yusuf, inspired, scribbled, "The Nile carries our prayers, but keeps our secrets in its silt." Safia, her voice hesitant at first, spoke of her son, who loved to watch the river's boats, dreaming of captaining one someday. The group listened, their silence a kind of reverence, the hashish fostering a shared warmth that eased her grief. Across the city, Layla's women's hashish house glowed with its own life. The jasmine vines, now heavy with late-season blooms, framed the courtyard like a living curtain, their scent mingling with the sweet smoke of hashish paste. Fatima, the weaver, sat cross-legged, her latest rug spread before her, its greens and blues evoking the Nile's flow. Salma, the bride-to-be, was lighter tonight, her wedding now a month past, her smile a testament to newfound contentment. Noura, the dancer, moved with a quiet grace, her bangles chiming as she poured tea. Hannah, the schoolteacher in training, brought a book of poetry, its pages worn from her eager hands. Aisha, the midwife, joined them, her face tired but warm from a long day's work. Layla, her hands deft from years of preparing hashish, mixed a new blend tonight, laced with crushed rose petals for a softer, floral note. The women settled into their cushions, the lamps casting shadows that danced like spirits on the walls. Hannah read a poem aloud, its lines celebrating the strength of women who built homes from love and labor. The words, amplified by the hashish, stirred nods and soft sighs. Noura responded with a story of a dancer who performed for the Khedive's court, her steps so powerful they silenced the room's chatter. She danced for herself, not them, Noura said, her eyes gleaming. The hashish taught her that. Fatima, her fingers tracing her rug's patterns, spoke of her craft as a kind of prayer. Each knot is a wish, for my children, for my city, for peace. Salma, emboldened by the smoke, shared a small victory. Her husband had agreed to let her visit her family weekly, a freedom she'd feared would be lost. Aisha offered a tale of a birth under a full moon, the mother's strength a reminder of life's resilience. The hashish wove their words into a tapestry of sisterhood, each story a thread strengthening the whole. Back at Dar al-Sabaun, the night deepened, the air thick with smoke and stories. The rabab player, a quiet man named Tariq, strummed a melody that echoed the Nile's flow, its notes weaving through the haze. Rami's boatmen joined in, their voices rising in a Nubian song of homecoming, the words unfamiliar but the longing universal. Safia, her shawl loosened now, spoke of her son's laughter, how it carried her through loss. Zainab offered her a small vial of lavender oil for sleepless nights, and the gesture brought tears to Safia's eyes, quickly wiped away. The hashish houses were not untouched by the world's currents. News of unrest filtered in, protests in the Delta, whispers of rebellion against British control. Omar spoke of students at Al-Azhar debating reform, their voices growing bolder. Yet, the hashish tempered these tensions, turning them into reflections rather than arguments. Change comes like the Nile's flood, Baba Hassan said. Slow, then sudden, but always inevitable. The group nodded, the smoke softening the edges of their fears. Seasons shaped the house's rhythms. In the Khamsin winds of spring, when sandstorms cloaked Cairo in a gritty haze, the houses offered shelter, their thick walls muffling the howl outside. Patrons shared tales of survival, of ancestors who weathered worse. In winter, when the Nile's banks grew chilly, the braziers' glow drew them closer, stories turning to warmth and family. The hashish adapted too, lighter blends in summer, richer ones in winter, always a bridge to calm. As dawn neared, Dar al-Saban grew still. The lanterns flickered low, their oil nearly gone. Karim gathered his spices, Yusuf his poems, Zainab her herbs. Rami promised more Aswan hashish, Omar a return with new questions. Safia, lighter nawart. As the 1870s gave way to the early 1880s, Cairo pulsed with a restless energy. The Khedive's lavish projects had left Egypt teetering under foreign debt, and the British presence grew heavier, their officers patrolling the streets with an air of ownership. Yet, in the shadow of this change, the hashish houses stood as quiet sanctuaries, their doors open to all who sought respite. Dar al-Saban, near the ancient Bab Zawela Gate, was a beacon in the old city, its cracked walls and worn cushions holding the stories of countless nights. Layla's courtyard, hidden behind jasmine vines, offered the same solace to women, its intimacy a counterpoint to the city's clamor. On this evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the minarets, Dar al-Saban came alive. Ahmed, the keeper, moved with the steady grace of habit, stoking the brazier until its coals glowed like small suns, their warmth mingling with the scent of mint tea brewing in a dented copper pot. He prepared the hashish with care, crumbling resin from Rami's Aswan supply into pipes, its floral notes promising a gentle escape. The lanterns, hung from the ceiling's blackened beams, flickered softly, painting the room in hues of amber and gold. The regulars arrived, each carrying the weight of their day. Karim, the spice merchant, bore a sack of cardamom pods, their sharp scent clinging to his fingers. Yusuf, the poet, clutched a new notebook, its pages already smudged with ink. Baba Hassan, the storyteller, settled into his corner, his turban slightly askew, a new tale brewing in his eyes. Zainab, the healer, carried a bundle of dried sage, its earthy aroma blending with the hashish. Rami and his Nubian boatman brought laughter, their river-worn faces bright with the joy of return. Omar, the Al-Azhar scholar, now a fixture, arrived with a scroll under his arm, his quest for clarity tempered by the house's calm. Safia, the widow, returned too, her shawl less tightly drawn tonight, her son's dreams of boats giving her purpose. A new face joined the circle, Khalil, a blacksmith from the coppersmith's quarter, his hands scarred from forge fires and his eyes heavy with unspoken grief. He'd heard of Dar al-Saban from a fellow artisan, seeking relief from the ache of long hours and a heart bruised by loss. Ahmed welcomed him with a pipe and a cup of tea, his voice low and reassuring. The smoke listens, even when we cannot speak. Khalil nodded, inhaling deeply, the hashish softening the edges of his pain as he sank onto a cushion near Zainab. The night unfolded in its familiar rhythm, the smoke weaving a tapestry of voices and stories. Baba Hassan began with a tale of a caravan that wandered the desert for 40 years, guided only by a star that moved with the heart's desire. They found no gold, he said, his voice a slow cadence, but they found each other. The hashish made the story glow, each word conjuring dunes and starlight. Rami added a river tale, a boatman who outwitted a crocodile god, earning safe passage for his village. The Nile tests us, he said, passing the pipe, but it rewards the bold. Zainab, her fingers tracing the sage bundle, spoke of a patient she'd tended, a child with a fever that broke under a poultice of Nile silt and herbs. The river gives more than we know, she said, her voice soft but sure. Omar, his scholar's mind loosened by the smoke, mused on the river's divine nature. Is it not a sign of God's mercy, this water that feeds us all? Khalil, new to the circle, listened quietly, then spoke haltingly of his forge, how the fire's heat reminded him of life's trials. "But here," he said, exhaling a plume of smoke, "the fire is kinder." The group nodded, the hashish fostering a shared understanding, a sense that all burdens were lighter when carried together. Yusuf, inspired, read a new poem. In the smoke's embrace, we are reeds/swaying in the Nile's breath, rooted yet free. Safia smiled, her thoughts on her son, who'd begun drawing boats on scraps of paper, each sketch a step toward his dream. Mahmoud, the young water carrier, emboldened by the hashish, shared his own progress. He'd saved enough for a small share in a boat, a hope that felt closer in the haze. The room hummed with quiet encouragement, the smoke binding their dreams like threads in a loom. Across the city, Layla's courtyard glowed under the stars, its jasmine vines heavy with scent. The women gathered, their voices a soft counterpoint to the men's deeper tones at Dar al-Saban. Fatima, the weaver, spread her latest rug, its patterns swirling like river currents. Salma, now settled into married life, radiated a quiet joy, her fears replaced by small victories. Noura, the dancer, moved with a fluid grace, her bangles chiming as she poured tea. Hannah, the schoolteacher in training, brought a new energy, her eyes bright with ideas from her studies. Aisha, the midwife, arrived late, her hands still scented with the herbs of her trade. A new woman joined them, Mariam, a baker from the market, her apron dusted with flour, her smile weary but warm. Layla prepared the hashish paste with her usual skill, mixing it with honey and crushed violets for a delicate sweetness. The women settled into their cushions, the lamps casting shadows that danced like memories on the walls. Noura began with a story of a dance she'd performed at a Nile festival, the crowd's cheers fading as she moved for the river alone. "It was like dancing with a lover," she said, her voice dreamy under the hashish's spell. Hannah, inspired, spoke of teaching girls to read, her dream of a school where knowledge flowed like the Nile. "Words are rivers too," she said, and the women nodded, the smoke making her vision feel possible. Fatima shared a memory of her mother, who'd woven rugs under starlight, each not a prayer for her children. Mariam, new to the circle, spoke of her bakery, how the scent of bread baking reminded her of her late husband's laughter. Aisha offered a tale of a birth that morning, a girl born with eyes like the river's depths. Salma, her confidence growing, shared a recipe for stuffed vine leaves, a gift from her mother-in-law, bridging the gap between families. The hashish wove their stories together, turning the courtyard into a sanctuary where every voice mattered. The world outside pressed in, its tensions seeping through the cracks. At Dar al-Saban, Rami spoke of unrest in the south, where villagers defied tax collectors with stones and songs. Omar whispered of Urabi's growing movement, a call for Egyptian sovereignty that stirred even Al-Azhal's halls. Yet, the hashish tempered these talks, turning them into reflections on freedom and fate. "The Nile flows no matter who rules," Baba Hassan said, his words a balm. Khalil, the blacksmith, found courage to share his loss, a sister taken by illness, her memory now forged into every hammer strike. The smoke carried his grief upward, shared by the circle's silence. At Layla's, the women spoke of their own struggles, rising flour prices, husbands conscripted to distant wars, children hungry for more than food. Hannah's dreams of education clashed with the reality of a city under foreign eyes, but the hashish fueled her resolve. Mariam, her hands kneading invisible dough, spoke of baking extra loaves for the poor, a quiet rebellion against scarcity. The courtyard, like Dar al-Saban, became a space where hope could breathe, where the future felt possible, if only for a night. As winter's chill deepened, hashish, richer in. By the early 1880s, Cairo was a city of contrasts, its ancient heart beating beneath a veneer of modernity. The Khedive's grand projects, opera houses, gaslit streets, and canals carved through the desert had stretched Egypt's coffers thin and British influence tightened like a noose. The old city, with its maze of alleys and mud-brick homes, held fast, and the hashish houses, like Dar al-Saban near Bab Zawela and Layla's hidden courtyard, remained vital refuges. These were places where the Nile's eternal rhythm drowned out the clamor of empires, where the smoke of hashish wove dreams into reality. At Dar al-Sabaun, the evening unfolded with a quiet ceremony of habit. Ahmed, the keeper, moved like a shadow through the room, stoking the brazier until its coals glowed a deep red, their warmth mingling with the scent of brewing tea, mint and anise, steeped strong in a battered copper pot. He prepared the hashish with care, blending Rami's floral Aswan resin with a local strain, its earthier notes grounding the mix. The lanterns, their glass smudged from years of use, cast a soft amber light, softening the room's cracked walls and worn cushions into a haven of comfort. The regulars arrived as dusk painted the sky in shades of violet and gold. Karim, the spice merchant, carried a sack of cumin, its warm scent trailing behind him. Yusuf, the poet, clutched a new poem, its lines inspired by a fleeting glimpse of a felucca's sail on the Nile. Baba Hassan, the storyteller, settled into his corner, his eyes alight with a tale of ancient queens. Zainab, the healer, brought a pouch of dried hibiscus, its tart fragrance a gift for the tea. Rami and his Nubian boatman filled the room with laughter, their river-worn hands passing a pipe of their prized hashish. Omar, the Al-Azhar scholar, arrived with a book of philosophy, his quest for truth now tempered by the house's calm. Safia, the widow, returned with a lighter step, her son's boat drawings now pinned to her heart. Khalil, the blacksmith, was there too, his scarred hands steadier, his grief softened by the house's embrace. A new patron slipped through the door, Amira, a seamstress from the cloth market, her fingers calloused from needlework and her eyes bright with curiosity. She'd heard of Dar al-Sabaun from Zainab, who'd mended her son's cough with a river silt poultice. Ahmed welcomed her with a pipe and a gentle smile, sensing her need for respite. "The smoke stitches the soul," he said, and Amira nodded, settling near Safia, the hashish's warmth easing the tension in her shoulders. The night wove itself together, the smoke curling like a river through the room. Baba Hassan began with a story of Nefertari, a queen whose beauty rivaled the Nile's shimmer. "She walked the river's banks," he said, his voice a slow melody, "and where her feet touched, lotus flowers bloomed." The hashish made the tale vivid, each word painting petals on water. Rami added a Nubian legend of a river spirit who guarded boatmen, her voice a whisper in the reeds. "She saved my father once," he said, his eyes distant, when his boat caught in the cataracts. Zainab, passing the pipe to Amira, spoke of her latest remedy, a salve of aloe and Nile mud that soothed burns. "The river knows pain," she said, "and it knows healing." Omar, his scholar's mind softened, mused on the Nile as a metaphor for divine order. Its flow is constant, yet it bends to no man's will. Khalil, the blacksmith, shared a memory of a sister who loved the river's edge, her laughter like its ripples. "She's gone," he said, his voice steady now, "but the Nile carries her still." Amira, new to the circle, spoke quietly of her work, sewing galabeas for merchants, each stitch a hope for her daughter's future. The hashish wove their stories into a shared tapestry, each voice a thread in the night's fabric. Yusuf read a poem, "The Nile's breath in the smoke's curl, slash a river of dreams through a desert of time." Safia, her heart lighter, spoke of her son's latest drawing, a boat with wings, soaring above the water. Mahmoud, the water carrier, shared his progress. He joined a boat crew, his dream of the Nile now within reach. The group murmured encouragement, the hashish making every hope feel tangible, every sorrow shared. Across the city, Layla's courtyard glowed under a crescent moon, its jasmine vines heavy with scent. The women gathered, their voices a soft symphony against the night's quiet. Fatima, the weaver, spread a new rug, its patterns evoking the river's bends. Salma, now a young wife, radiated contentment, her marriage blossoming like the jasmine above. Noura, the dancer, moved with a quiet grace, her bangles chiming as she poured tea. Hannah, the schoolteacher in training, brought a notebook filled with lesson plans, her dream of a girl's school growing clearer. Aisha, the midwife, arrived with stories of new life, her hands still scented with rosemary. Miriam, the baker, returned, her apron clean but her hands still dusted with flour. A new woman joined them, Yasmin, a laundress from the riverbank, her arms strong from scrubbing linens in the Nile's flow. Layla prepared the hashish paste with her usual care, blending it with honey and crushed lavender for a soothing sweetness. The women settled into their cushions, the lamps casting shadows that danced like memories. Noura began with a tale of a dance under a harvest moon, her steps mirroring the Nile's sway. "The river taught me to move," she said, her voice dreamy. Hannah spoke of her students, girls eager for knowledge despite their families' doubts. "They're like seeds," she said, waiting for the river's flood to grow. Fatima shared a memory of her grandmother, who wove tales as intricate as her rugs, each one a lesson in endurance. Miriam spoke of her bakery, how the scent of bread brought customers who shared their own stories. Yasmin, new to the circle, described washing linens at dawn, the Nile's cool touch-a-balm for her weary hands. Aisha told of a birth under starlight, the mother's strength a reminder of life's miracles. Salma, her confidence growing, shared a new skill, embroidering her husband's robes, a quiet act of love. The Hashish wove their voices into a chorus, the courtyard a sanctuary where dreams and burdens mingled freely. The world outside was restless. At Dar al-Sabaun, Rami spoke of villages refusing British taxes, their defiance echoing up the Nile. Omar whispered of Urabi's rebellion, now a growing fire, stirring even the quietest scholars. Yet, the Hashish softened these tensions, turning them into reflections on freedom and fate. "The Nile endures," Baba Hassan said, "and so do we." Amira, her needlework the metaphor, spoke of stitching broken lives together, her daughter's smile her greatest thread. Adam Layla's, the women shared their own struggles, rising costs, children pulled from school to work, whispers of revolt. Hannah dreamed of a school free from foreign rule, where girls could learn their history. Yasmin spoke of washing soldiers' uniforms, her hands in the Nile but her heart with Egypt. The Hashish fueled their resolve, turning fears into shared strength, hopes into quiet prayers. Seasons shaped the house's rhythms. Spring's Khamsin winds brought sand that dusted the cushions, but the smoke offered clarity amid the haze. Winter's chill drew patrons closer, stories of warmth and survival dominating the nights. The Hashish adapted, light and floral in spring, deep and rich in winter, always a. By 1882, Cairo was a city holding its breath. The Urabi revolt, a spark of Egyptian defiance against foreign control, had ignited tensions and British troops were a growing presence, their boots echoing in the streets. The Khedive's palaces gleamed, but the old city's alleys pulsed with the resilience of its people. Amid this unrest, the Hashish houses, Dar al-Sabaun near Bab Zawela, Layla's hidden courtyard, and others scattered like stars in Cairo's maze, stood as quiet anchors, their doors open to those seeking solace in the haze. These were places where the Nile's eternal song drowned out the world's discord, where Hashish smoke wove dreams into the fabric of reality. At Dar al-Sabaun, the evening began with the familiar rituals that marked its nights. Ahmed, the keeper, moved with a quiet grace, stoking the brazier until its coals glowed like embers of a forgotten fire, their warmth mingling with the scent of mint tea brewing in a copper pot etched with years of use. He prepared the hashish with reverence, blending Rami's floral Aswan resin with a local strain, its earthy depth grounding the mix. The lanterns, their glass clouded by time, cast a golden glow across the room's patched cushions and cracked walls, creating a cocoon of comfort in the heart of the old city. The regulars arrived as dusk draped Cairo in shades of indigo and amber. Karim, the spice merchant, carried a pouch of saffron, its golden threads a treasure from the bazaar. Yusuf, the poet, clutched a notebook, its pages brimming with verses born from the city's restless pulse. Baba Hassan, the storyteller, settled into his corner, his eyes alight with a tale of ancient warriors. Zainab, the healer, brought a bundle of dried lotus and chamomile, their scents a promise of calm. Rami and his Nubian boatmen filled the room with their river-worn laughter, their pipes already lit with Aswan hashish. Omar, the Al-Azhar scholar, arrived with a new book, its pages heavy with Sufi poetry. Safia, the widow, returned with a lighter heart, her son's boat drawings now a source of pride. Khalil, the blacksmith, was there too, his scarred hands steadier, his grief softened by the house's embrace. Amira, the seamstress, joined them, her needlework calluses a testament to her craft, her eyes brighter with each visit. A new figure slipped through the door, Tariq, a young fellow from the Delta, his clothes dusted with the soil of his fields. He'd come to Cairo seeking work, his village strained by taxes and drought. Zainab, sensing his unease, offered him a pipe, her voice gentle. The smoke carries the river's peace. Tariq accepted, his shoulders relaxing as the hashish's warmth spread through him, settling him near Khalil, whose quiet strength was a comfort. The night unfolded in a haze of smoke and stories, the hashish weaving the group into a single, unhurried rhythm. Baba Hassan began with a tale of a Bedouin prince who crossed the desert to find a lost city, guided by a falcon that spoke in dreams. The sands hid it, he said, his voice a slow chant, but the heart sees what the eye cannot. The hashish made the story shimmer, each word conjuring dunes and starlit skies. Rami added a river tale, a boatman who navigated the Nile blindfolded, trusting the current's whispers. The river knows its own, he said, passing the pipe to Tariq, who inhaled deeply, his village's hardships fading in the smoke. Zainab spoke of a new remedy, a tea of lotus and honey that eased troubled dreams. The Nile teaches us to rest, she said, her hands sorting her herbs with care. Omar, his scholar's mind softened, read a Sufi verse. In the heart silence, God's river flows. Khalil shared a memory of his sister, who'd loved forging small charms from scraps of metal, her laughter echoing in his work. Amira spoke of sewing a wedding dress, each stitch a prayer for the bride's joy. Tariq, his voice tentative, described his fields, where the Nile's flood had failed this year, leaving his family hungry. The group listened, their silence a balm, the hashish fostering a shared warmth that eased his fears. Yusuf read a poem. The smoke rises like a prayer, the Nile carries it to the stars. Safia spoke of her son, now apprenticed to a boatman, his drawings turning to reality. Mahmoud, the water carrier, shared his triumph. He'd sailed his first trip down the Nile, the river's embrace a dream fulfilled. The room hummed with quiet pride, the hashish making every story a shared victory, every sorrow a shared weight. Across the city, Layla's courtyard glowed under a sky thick with stars, its jasmine vines weaving a fragrant canopy. The women gathered, their voices a soft melody against the night's quiet. Fatima, the weaver, spread a new rug, its patterns swirling like the Nile's eddies. Salma, now a confident wife, shared stories of her new home, her laughter bright. Noura, the dancer, moved with a fluid grace, her bangles chiming as she poured tea. Hannah, the schoolteacher in training, brought a stack of papers, her lesson plans growing bolder. Aisha, the midwife, arrived with tales of new life, her hands scented with sage. Miriam, the baker, returned with a basket of fresh bread, its warmth a gift for the circle. Yasmin, the laundress, was there too, her arms strong from the river's work, her smile softer with each visit. A new woman joined them, Layla, a potter from the outskirts, her hands rough from clay and her eyes warm with curiosity. Layla welcomed her with a bowl of hashish paste, its sweetness laced with rosewater. For the soul's shaping, she said, and Layla smiled, settling near Miriam, the hashish easing her shyness. The women sank into their cushions, the lamps casting shadows that danced like spirits. Noura began with a tale of a dance at a village wedding, her steps weaving love into the air. The Nile clapped for me, she said, her voice dreamy under the hashish's spell. Hannah spoke of her students, girls who read poetry with hungry eyes, their futures a rebellion against tradition. They'll write their own rivers, she said, her words sparking nods. Fatima shared a memory of her mother's loom, its rhythm like the Nile's pulse. Miriam spoke of baking bread at dawn, the oven's heat a promise of sustenance. Yasmin described washing linens in the river, the water's cool touch a moment of peace. Layla, new to the circle, spoke of shaping clay into bowls, each one a vessel for hope. Aisha told of a birth under a waning moon, the mother's courage a light in the dark. The hashish wove their stories into a tapestry, the courtyard a sanctuary where every voice bloomed. The world outside was turbulent. At Dar el-Sabaun, Rami spoke of boats stopped by British patrols, their cargo taxed to ruin. Omar whispered of Urabi's forces gathering, a dream of Egyptian rule stirring the city. Yet the hashish softened these fears, turning them into reflections on resilience. The Nile flows through empires, Baba Hassan said, and we flow with it. Tariq, his village's drought heavy on his heart, found solace in the group's quiet strength, the smoke carrying his worries upward. Adam Layla's, the women shared their own struggles, markets strained by foreign taxes, children pulled from school to work, whispers of revolt in the streets. Hannah spoke of teaching in secret, her lessons a defiance of British oversight. Layla described shaping clay under torchlight, her pots a quiet protest against scarcity. The hashish fueled their dreams, turning fears into shared resolve, hopes into whispered prayers. Seasons. By the autumn of 1882, Cairo was a city on edge. The Urabi revolt had swelled into a full-throated cry for Egyptian sovereignty, and British warships loomed in Alexandria's harbor, their presence a shadow over the Nile. The old city, with its winding alleys and ancient gates, pulsed with defiance, its people whispering of freedom in markets and mosques. Amid this unrest, the hashish houses, Dar al-Sabah near Bab Zawela, Layla's hidden courtyard, and others tucked into Cairo's maze, remained sanctuaries, their doors open to those seeking refuge in the haze. These were places where the Nile's eternal rhythm drowned out the drums of war, where hashish smoke wove dreams into the fabric of the night. At Dar al-Sabah, the evening began with the quiet rituals that defined its existence. Ahmed, the keeper, moved with the steady grace of a man who knew his purpose, stoking the brazier until its coals glowed like stars fallen to earth, their warmth mingling with the scent of mint tea brewing in a copper pot etched with decades of use. He prepared the hashish with care, blending Rami's floral Aswan resin with a local strain, its earthy depth anchoring the mix. The lanterns, their glass mottled by years of smoke, cast a golden light across the room's patched cushions and cracked walls, creating a haven where time softened and worries dissolved. The regulars arrived as dusk painted the sky in hues of saffron and deep indigo. Karim, the spice merchant, carried a pouch of star anise, its licorice-like scent trailing behind him. Yusuf, the poet, clutched a notebook, its pages heavy with verses born from the city's restless pulse. Baba Hassan, the storyteller, settled into his corner, his turban slightly askew, a tale of ancient rebels brewing in his eyes. Zainab, the healer, brought a bundle of dried rosemary, its sharp fragrance a gift for the tea. Rami and his Nubian boatmen filled the room with their river-worn laughter, their pipes lit with Aswan hashish. Omar, the Al-Azhar scholar, arrived with a scroll of Rumi's poetry, his quest for clarity now a dance with the divine. Safia, the widow, returned with a quiet pride, her son now training with a boat crew. Khalil, the blacksmith, was there too, his scarred hands steadier, his grief softened by the house's embrace. Amira, the seamstress, joined them, her needlework calluses a badge of her craft, her eyes bright with purpose. Tariq, the fellah from the Delta, returned, his clothes still dusted with soil, his hope kindled by the house's warmth. A new patron slipped through the door, Hassan, a carpenter from the old quarter, his hands rough from carving wood for mosque doors. He'd come seeking relief from the strain of long hours and the fear of British raids, his workshop near a street now patrolled by foreign soldiers. Zainab, sensing his tension, offered him a pipe, her voice gentle. The smoke carves peace from pain. Hassan nodded, settling near Tariq, the hashish's warmth easing the knots in his shoulders as he inhaled its floral promise. The night unfolded in a haze of smoke and stories, the hashish weaving the group into a single, unhurried rhythm. Baba Hassan began with a tale of a rebel poet from the time of the Mamluks, whose verses sparked a revolt against tyranny. His words were swords, he said, his voice a slow chant, cutting through fear to find freedom. The hashish made the story glow, each word conjuring torchlit streets and whispered defiance. Rami added a river tale, a boatman who had rebels in his felucca, ferrying them past Ottoman guards under a moonless sky. The Nile keeps secrets, he said, passing the pipe to Hassan, who listened wide-eyed, his carpenter's heart stirred by tales of courage. Zainab spoke of a new remedy, a salve of Nile silt and lavender that soothed soldiers' wounds, a small act of healing in a city bracing for war. "The river gives strength," she said, her hands sorting her herbs with care. Omar, his scholar's mind softened, read a Rumi verse. "Beyond right and wrong, there is a field. I'll meet you there." Khalil shared a memory of his sister, who'd carved her name into a tree by the Nile, its bark now a keeper of her spirit. Amira spoke of sewing uniforms for Urabi's men, each stitch a quiet prayer for their safety. Tariq described his village's defiance, refusing to pay British taxes, their fields watered by hope as much as the Nile. Hassan, new to the circle, spoke of carving a door for a rebel's home, its patterns a hidden map of resistance. The Hashish wove their stories into a shared tapestry, each voice a thread in the night's fabric. Yusuf read a poem. "The smoke rises like a rebel's cry, the Nile carries it to the sky." Safia spoke of her son's first voyage, his boat slicing through the river like a dream taking flight. Mahmoud, the water carrier turned sailor, shared his latest trip, navigating rapids under starlight, the Nile his guide. The room hummed with quiet pride, the Hashish making every story a shared victory, every sorrow a shared weight. Across the city, Layla's courtyard glowed under a sky thick with stars, its jasmine vines heavy with scent. The women gathered, their voices a soft symphony against the night's unrest. Fatima, the weaver, spread a new rug, its patterns swirling like the Nile's currents. Salma, now a confident wife, shared stories of her new family, her laughter bright. Noura, the dancer, moved with fluid grace, her bangles chiming as she poured tea. Hannah, the schoolteacher in training, brought a stack of letters from her students, their words a rebellion against ignorance. Aisha, the midwife, arrived with tales of new life, her hands scented with sage. Miriam, the baker, returned with a basket of sesame bread, its warmth a gift for the circle. Yasmin, the laundress, was there too, her arms strong from the river's work, her smile softer with each visit. Layla, the potter, returned, her hands rough with clay, her eyes warm with purpose. A new woman joined them, Soraya, a storyteller from the Bedouin tribes, her voice rich with the desert's cadence. Layla welcomed her with a bowl of hashish paste, its sweetness laced with crushed violets. "For the tales that bind us," she said, and Soraya smiled, settling near Layla, the hashish easing her into the circle's warmth. The women sank into their cushions, the lamps casting shadows that danced like spirits. Soraya began with a tale of a desert queen who led her people to an oasis, her courage a beacon in the sand. "She followed the stars," Soraya said, her voice dreamy under the hashish's spell. Hannah spoke of her students, girls who wrote poems of freedom, their pens defying British rule. Fatima shared a memory of her mother's loom, its rhythm a prayer for peace. Miriam spoke of baking bread for rebels, hiding messages in the loaves. Yasmin described washing linens for Urabi's men, the Nile her ally in their cause. Layla spoke of shaping clay into lamps, each one a light against the dark. Aisha told of a birth during a raid, the mother's strength a quiet victory. The Hashish wove their stories into a chorus, the courtyard a sanctuary where every voice bloomed. The world outside was a storm. At Dar al-Sabaun, Rami spoke of boats seized by British patrols, their crews defiant. Omar whispered of Al-Azhar scholars joining Urabi, their sermons now calls to action. Yet, the Hashish softened these fears, turning them into reflections on resilience. "The Nile flows through empires," Baba Hassan said, El Song. By late 1882, Cairo was a city ablaze with tension. The Urabi revolt had reached its zenith, a defiant cry for Egyptian sovereignty against British and Ottoman control. British forces had bombarded Alexandria, and their troops now marched toward Cairo, their presence a heavy weight on the city's ancient streets. The old city, with its labyrinthine alleys and weathered gates, pulsed with whispered resistance, its people clinging to hope in markets, mosques, and hidden corners. Amid the storm, the Hashish houses, Dar al-Sabaun near Bab Zawela, Layla's jasmine-scented courtyard, and others scattered like oases in Cairo's maze, stood as quiet sanctuaries, their doors open to those seeking refuge in the haze. These were places where the Nile's eternal rhythm drowned out the clash of empires, where hashish smoke wove dreams into the fabric of survival. At Dar al-Sabaun, the evening began with the familiar rituals that anchored its nights. Ahmed, the keeper, moved with the quiet grace of a man who understood the weight of his role, stoking the brazier until its coals glowed like embers of a forgotten sun, their warmth mingling with the scent of mint tea brewing in a copper pot worn smooth by years of use. He prepared the hashish with reverence, blending Rami's floral Aswan resin with a local strain, its earthy depth a grounding force in the room's haze. The lanterns, their glass smudged with the patina of countless nights, cast a golden glow across the patched cushions and cracked walls, creating a haven where time softened and fears dissolved. The regulars arrived as dusk cloaked Cairo in shades of amber and deep violet. Karim, the spice merchant, carried a pouch of cloves, their sharp scent clinging to his galabeah like a second skin. Yusuf, the poet, clutched a notebook, its pages heavy with verses born from the city's defiant pulse. Baba Hassan, the storyteller, settled into his corner, his eyes alight with a tale of ancient defiance. Zainab, the healer, brought a bundle of dried sage and lotus, their scents a promise of calm. Rami and his Nubian boatmen filled the room with their river-worn laughter, their pipes lit with Aswan hashish. Omar, the Al-Azhar scholar, arrived with a scroll of mystic poetry, his quest for truth now a dance with the divine. Safia, the widow, returned with a quiet pride, her son now a boatman's apprentice, his dreams taking sail. Khalil, the blacksmith, was there too, his scarred hands steadier, his grief softened by the house's embrace. Amira, the seamstress, joined them, her needlework calluses a badge of her craft, her eyes bright with purpose. Tariq, the fellah from the Delta, returned, his soil-dusted clothes a testament to his field struggle. Hassan, the carpenter, was there, his hands rough from carving, his heart heavy with the fear of British raids. A new patron slipped through the door. Noor, a young messenger who ran dispatches between Urabi's rebels, his eyes sharp with urgency but weary from sleepless nights. Zainab, sensing his exhaustion, offered him a pipe, her voice gentle. The smoke carries rest to the restless. Noor nodded, settling near Hassan, the hashish's warmth easing the tension in his frame as he inhaled its floral promise. The night unfolded in a haze of smoke and stories, the hashish weaving the group into a single, unhurried rhythm. Baba Hassan began with a tale of a warrior poet from the time of Saladin, whose verses rallied a city against invaders. His words were torches, he said, his voice a slow chant, lighting the path to freedom. The hashish made the story glow, each word conjuring firelit streets and defiant cries. Rami added a river tale, a boatman who had rebel messages in his cargo, slipping past British patrols under starlight. "The Nile is our ally," he said, passing the pipe to Noor, who listened with a flicker of hope in his eyes. Zainab spoke of a new remedy, a poultice of Nile silt and chamomile that soothed wounds from street clashes, her hands steady as she sorted her herbs. Omar, his scholar's mind softened, read a mystic verse. "In the heart's chaos, the river finds peace." Khalil shared a memory of his sister, whose charms he now forged for rebels, each one a talisman of her spirit. Amira spoke of sewing banners for Urabi's men, their colors bold against the city's dust. Tariq described his village's resistance, hiding grain from British tax collectors, their fields a quiet battlefield. Hassan, the carpenter, spoke of carving a secret compartment in a rebel's door, a hiding place for messages. Noor, his voice low, shared his latest run, delivering a letter to Urabi's camp under cover of night, his heart pounding with the Nile's rhythm. The hashish wove their stories into a shared tapestry, each voice a thread in the night's defiance. Yusuf read a poem. "The smoke rises like a rebel's prayer, slash the Nile carries it to the stars." Sophia spoke of her son's first voyage, his boat cutting through the river like a blade of hope. Mahmoud, now a sailor, shared his latest trip, guiding a felucca past British checkpoints, the Nile his shield. The room hummed with quiet pride, the hashish making every story a shared victory, every fear a shared strength. Across the city, Layla's courtyard glowed under a sky heavy with clouds, its jasmine vines weaving a fragrant canopy against the night's unrest. The women gathered, their voices a soft melody amid the city's tension. Fatima, the weaver, spread a new rug, its patterns swirling like the Nile's eddies. Salma, now a confident wife, shared stories of her new family, her laughter a light in the dark. Noura, the dancer, moved with fluid grace, her bangles chiming as she poured tea. Hannah, the schoolteacher in training, brought a stack of poems from her students, their words a rebellion against oppression. Aisha, the midwife, arrived with tales of new life, her hands scented with rosemary. Miriam, the baker, returned with a basket of barley bread, its warmth a gift for the circle. Yasmin, the laundress, was there too, her arms strong from the river's work, her smile softer with each visit. Layla, the potter, returned, her hands rough with clay, her eyes warm with purpose. Soraya, the Bedouin storyteller, was there, her desert tales a spark in the night. A new woman joined them, Amina, a widow who sold herbs in the market, her hands stained with henna and her heart heavy with loss. Layla welcomed her with a bowl of hashish paste, its sweetness laced with crushed lavender. For the soul's healing, she said, and Amina smiled, settling near Soraya, the hashish easing her into the circle's warmth. The women sank into their cushions, the lamps casting shadows that danced like spirits. Soraya began with a tale of a desert rebel who rode a sandstorm to free her tribe, her courage a beacon in the dunes. She followed the wind, Soraya said, her voice dreamy under the hashish's spell. Hannah spoke of her students, girls who hid their books from British eyes, their learning a quiet revolt. Fatima shared a memory of her mother's loom, its rhythm a prayer for peace. Miriam spoke of baking bread for rebel families, hiding coins in the loaves. Yasmin described washing linens for Urabi's men, the Nile her partner in their cause. Layla spoke of shaping clay into jars for rebel supplies, each one a